Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Imagine you finally land your dream client. The pay is incredible and your career is finally taking off. But then the messages start. They aren't about the project. They're personal. They're inappropriate. Now you face a nightmare. Do you keep the money and lose your dignity, or do you speak up and lose your livelihood? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving into a high-stakes story titled The Cost of the Contract. This is a story about professional boundaries, the reality of freelancing, and the courage it takes to say no when the stakes are highest. As we follow our protagonist, Mark, through this 10-chapter journey, we'll be focusing on advanced English vocabulary for negotiation, psychology, and conflict resolution. Let's see how a perfect job can turn into a professional trap.
Mark sat in his dimly lit studio, the cooling fan of his laptop humming a weary tune. For months, his bank balance had been a source of constant anxiety, a dwindling number that kept him awake at night. Then came the email from Victor Thorne, the creative director of a massive tech conglomerate. The contract was more than Mark had ever dreamed, a 6-month rebranding project with a payout that could clear his debts and buy him the high-end equipment he desperately needed. He remembered his hands shaking as he signed the digital document, feeling like he had finally won the freelance lottery. To a long and intimate partnership, Victor had written in a follow-up text, a phrase Mark initially dismissed as a quirk of an eccentric executive. The first week was a whirlwind of productivity and excitement as Mark poured his soul into the initial mood boards. However, the communication soon shifted from the official project management tool to personal late-night messages on Mark's phone. "I saw your profile picture today," one message read at 11 p.m. "You have a very striking look, Mark. It's exactly the kind of energy I want for this brand." Mark hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He told himself it was just networking, that high-level clients were often hands-on and informal in their approach. He couldn't afford to be sensitive. He couldn't afford to lose the deposit that was already sitting in his account. He typed a polite, professional "thank you" and went back to work, ignoring the cold chill of his own intuition.
The second week began with a shift in the project's atmosphere, moving from professional collaboration to something far more personal. Victor started calling Mark's personal line instead of using the scheduled video conferences, often during dinner hours. "I prefer the sound of a human voice over a cold screen," Victor would say, his tone dropping into a low, familiar murmur. Mark tried to redirect the conversations toward the typography and color palettes, but Victor would effortlessly steer the topic back to Mark's life. He asked about Mark's hobbies, his relationship status, and what he did to unwind after a long day of creative work. Each time Mark gave a brief, neutral answer, Victor would push further, acting as though they were old friends sharing secrets. A new notification popped up on Mark's phone. "I'm in your neighborhood for a meeting. Why don't you drop by my hotel for a drink?" Mark's heart hammered against his ribs as he stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his wide eyes. It was nearly 10 p.m., and he had spent the last 5 hours perfecting the logo iterations Victor had requested. "I'm still at my desk, finishing the revisions you wanted," Mark typed back, his hands feeling cold despite the warmth of the room. "The work can wait," Victor replied instantly. "I'm more interested in the designer than the design tonight." Mark set the phone face down on his desk, unable to look at the screen anymore, yet unable to turn it off. The luxury of the deposit felt like a weight now, a heavy chain linking him to a man who didn't seem to understand the word no.
By the third week, the rebranding project felt less like design work and more like a psychological game of cat and mouse. Victor began rejecting Mark's professional drafts without any technical feedback, claiming they lacked passion and personal connection. Whenever Mark asked for specific revisions, Victor would send a voice note saying, "We need to sync our energies, Mark. Come to the studio tonight, just the two of us." Mark felt a mounting sense of dread every time his phone buzzed, a physical reaction he could no longer ignore. He decided to try a new tactic, defensive professionalism, where he replied only during business hours and only about the contract. Victor's response was immediate and chilling. "You've become very formal lately, Mark. I hope you aren't forgetting who is funding your career." The subtle threat hung in the air like a poisonous fog, making it hard for Mark to focus on his creative tasks. One afternoon, a large delivery arrived at Mark's door, an expensive, high-end espresso machine he hadn't ordered. A card tucked inside read, "For the late nights I'm keeping you up. I like to take care of what belongs to me. V." Mark stared at the machine, feeling a wave of nausea. It wasn't a gift, it was a claim of ownership. He realized that Victor was systematically blurring the lines between a business investment and a personal purchase. To return the gift would be an insult to a powerful man. To keep it felt like accepting a bribe for his silence. Mark sat in the silence of his studio, realizing that the golden handcuffs were tightening around his wrists with every passing hour. Mark spent the next morning staring at his financial spreadsheet, the red cells highlighting his precarious reality. He reached out to a former college professor, an industry veteran, to ask for advice without naming Victor directly. "A client is making me uncomfortable," Mark whispered into the phone, "but this contract is 80% of my yearly income." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, filled with the unspoken truth of the creative industry's power dynamics. "Documentation is your only shield, Mark," the professor finally replied. "If you don't have a trail of breadcrumbs, it's just your word against theirs." Mark began a secret folder on his hard drive, saving every late-night text, every vague threat, and every inappropriate gift notification. He noticed a pattern. Victor would send a boundary-crossing message, wait for Mark to protest, and then immediately pivot to work talk. This gaslighting made Mark feel like he was overreacting, like he was the one making things weird by being too sensitive. One evening, Victor sent a message that broke the usual cycle. "I've decided to move the final presentation to my private estate this weekend." "I'd prefer to present at the office or via the secure portal," Mark replied, his heart racing as he typed the words. "The office is for employees, Mark. You're a partner. Don't be difficult. I've already authorized your mid-project bonus." Mark checked his bank app. A staggering sum of money had been deposited, far more than the contract initially specified. The bonus didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a down payment on his dignity, a silent ledger he never agreed to sign. The weekend arrived, and the atmosphere in Mark's studio felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on him. Victor's messages became a relentless stream of consciousness, a mixture of professional demands and unsettlingly intimate observations. "I'm looking at the latest mock-ups," one text read at midnight. "They are beautiful, but they don't capture the curve of your smile. Why are you so guarded?" Mark felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and cold fury that made his hands shake as he gripped his coffee mug. He realized that the mid-project bonus was a trap. It was a physical manifestation of the leverage Victor held over his life.
Every time Mark tried to bring the conversation back to the brand's color theory, Victor would pivot to Mark's potential under his mentorship. Then the notification sound he had come to dread chimed. A photo arrived, followed by a message that made his blood run cold. It was a candid picture of Mark taken from across the street a few days ago, showing him entering a local cafe. "You looked lonely," the caption read. "You shouldn't be alone when you have someone like me willing to support your every whim." The realization hit Mark like a physical blow. He wasn't just being harassed, he was being watched. He didn't reply, leaving the message marked as read, his mind racing through every exit strategy he had ever considered. The financial relief the bonus provided now felt like a debt of blood, a weight that threatened to pull him under. He looked at the secret folder of screenshots on his desktop, knowing that the escalation had reached a point of no return. Mark decided to pivot his strategy, adopting a tone of radical professionalism to create a clear paper trail. He moved all communication back to the official project email, CCing Victor's executive assistant on every single reply. "Regarding the mid-project bonus," Mark wrote, "I will be holding these funds in escrow until the final deliverables are approved." Victor's response came not through email, but via a series of rapid-fire, disappearing messages on a private app. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mark," the text glowed on his screen before vanishing into nothingness. "I'm trying to build a future for you, and you're treating me like a common vendor? It's insulting and ungrateful." Mark didn't blink. He simply grabbed his second phone and took a physical photo of the screen before the message disappeared. He was building a digital fortress, brick by brick, screenshot by screenshot, documenting every unprofessional pivot Victor made. Victor tried to gaslight him during a brief phone call, laughing off the previous night's photo as a misunderstanding among friends. "I think you've been working too hard, Mark. You're getting paranoid. Maybe you should take a few days off at my beach house." Mark kept his voice flat and monotone, refusing to engage with the bait or the false concern in Victor's voice. "I am focused on the brand guidelines, Victor. If you have feedback on the logo, please send it via the portal by 5 p.m. The silence on the other end was cold, a predator realizing that its prey had stopped running and started recording. The day of the final presentation arrived, and Mark's studio felt like a pressure cooker about to blow. Victor had insisted on a private video call to finalize the vision before the board of directors saw the work. Mark, dressed in his most formal suit, sitting rigidly in front of the camera, his secret recording software already running. "You look tense, Mark," Victor said, his face filling the screen, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. "I'm ready to present the final brand identity, Victor. Can we begin the walkthrough?" Mark replied, his voice a steady blade. Victor ignored the request, leaning closer to his camera until his eyes seemed to pierce through the pixels. "Forget the logos for a moment. I've booked a flight for 2 to Milan this Friday, a business trip to celebrate your success." Mark felt the familiar surge of nausea, but this time it was overridden by a cold, sharp clarity. "I cannot go to Milan with you, Victor. Our relationship is strictly professional, and I need you to acknowledge that now." Victor's expression shifted instantly from a predatory grin to a mask of pure, unadulterated coldness. "If you don't get on that plane, Mark, this project is dead. Your reputation in this city will be ashes by Monday." The ultimatum was finally out in the open, stripped of the mentorship lies and the expensive gifts. "Then the project is dead," Mark said, his finger hovering over the end call button as the screen went black. He sat in the sudden silence of his room, the weight of the golden handcuffs finally falling away, replaced by the terrifying lightness of being broke.
The fallout was instantaneous and devastating, hitting Mark's inbox like a series of coordinated strikes. By Monday morning, an official legal notice from Victor's firm arrived, alleging a total breach of contract. The claims stated that Mark had failed to meet the creative standards of the project and was withholding intellectual property. Worse than the legal threats was the quiet blacklisting that began to ripple through Mark's professional network. A boutique agency he had worked with for years suddenly canceled a lucrative collaboration without a clear explanation. "We heard you were difficult to work with, Mark," a former colleague whispered over a tense, brief phone call. The mid-project bonus sat in his bank account like a lead weight. He knew he couldn't spend a single cent of it. He felt a deep sense of isolation, watching his professional reputation being dismantled by a man with infinite resources. His studio, once a place of creative sanctuary, now felt like a bunker where he was hiding from the world. He spent hours staring at the secret folder on his desktop, questioning if his documentation would ever be enough. The real-life problem was no longer just about harassment. It was about survival in an industry built on whispers. He realized that Victor wasn't just trying to fire him. He was trying to erase his professional existence entirely. Mark took a deep breath, opened a fresh document, and began to draft a formal response to the board of directors. He knew that if he stayed silent now, the ashes Victor promised would be the only thing left of his career. Mark decided that a silent defense was no longer an option. He needed to turn his secret folder into a public record. He reached out to a specialized legal advocate who dealt with workplace harassment and digital labor rights. "I have 6 months of screenshots, audio recordings, and unsolicited bank transfers," Mark said, his voice finally steady. The advocate reviewed the files, noting the clear pattern of quid pro quo harassment and professional gaslighting. "You aren't the first, Mark," the advocate whispered, revealing that 2 other designers had quietly settled with Victor's firm. Mark felt a surge of validation that replaced the lingering shame he had carried for months. He helped the legal team draft a comprehensive report detailing the abuse of power and the blacklisting threats. They bypassed Victor entirely and sent the dossier directly to the tech conglomerate's board of directors and their chief legal officer. The report included the unsolicited bonus payment, which Mark officially offered to return in exchange for a full release of his contract. For 48 hours, there was a deafening silence from the firm, a tension that made Mark's skin crawl with anxiety. Then, a formal letter arrived from the board. They were launching an internal investigation into Victor's conduct. Mark's paper trail was so undeniable that the firm's legal team immediately moved to protect the company's reputation. They offered Mark a mutual non-disclosure agreement and a settlement that covered his original contract and damages. Mark refused the silence clause. He wanted the right to tell his story and warn others about the golden handcuffs. He wasn't just a designer anymore. He was a whistleblower who had successfully dismantled a predator's leverage. The resolution of Mark's long nightmare didn't come with a parade, but with a profound sense of quiet. The tech conglomerate officially severed ties with Victor, citing a violation of corporate ethics following the internal investigation. While the legal battle had drained Mark's energy, the return of his professional reputation was a far greater reward. He spent the following week cleaning his studio, physically removing the expensive espresso machine and donating it to a local shelter. He looked at his bank balance, which was modest again, but every cent in it was clean and earned with integrity. Word of his stand against Victor began to circulate in the design community, changing the narrative from difficult to principled. A small, sustainable furniture brand reached out to Mark, offering him a modest contract for a new visual identity. The meeting took place in a bright public cafe during business hours with clear agendas and professional boundaries. "We value your work, Mark," the new client said, "and we value the way you handle your business." Mark felt a genuine smile touch his lips for the first time in months, a feeling of creative spark returning. He realized that the real-life problem of harassment had taught him the most valuable lesson of his career. Success wasn't measured by the size of the contract or the prestige of the client, but by the peace of mind at the end of the day. He sat down at his laptop, the cooling fan humming a steady, peaceful tune as he began his first sketch for the new project. The golden handcuffs were gone, replaced by the simple, powerful freedom of being a designer who owned his own story.
The story of Mark and Victor isn't just about a contract, it's about the hidden price of success. In the freelance world, the golden handcuffs often look like a dream come true until they start to chafe. Mark's journey reminds us that professional boundaries are not barriers to success, they are the foundation of it. By documenting the harassment and refusing the hush money, Mark reclaimed more than just his career, he reclaimed his voice. Real-life problems rarely have perfect endings, but they always provide the most powerful lessons in integrity. As you reflect on Mark's story, ask yourself, is any paycheck worth the cost of your peace of mind? And that brings us to the end of the cost of the contract. Mark faced a choice that many professionals encounter, staying silent for the sake of a paycheck or risking it all for the truth. In the end, his paper trail wasn't just evidence, it was his way out. Have you ever been in a situation where a professional relationship crossed the line? How did you handle it? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your real-life problem-solving stories. It helps us all learn and grow together. You can check the quiz below the description box. If you found the vocabulary in this story helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Glisso. We have more stories coming your way to help you master English through real-life drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.